I am going to go ahead and get us started. First off, introduce myself. My name is Brian Lee. I am our head of marketing and strategy here at Nirmata and very excited to moderate this discussion. This is going to be the first of what is going to be a series of webinars on AI governance, which we see is just a super relevant topic right now. Just as obviously AI has become the most powerful force in tech, if not all of business in the world right now. And we just see a huge gap. As companies are racing to adopt AI and are spending millions or even hundreds of millions of dollars on AI tokens, I think there's some fundamental questions that are arising right now. Like, namely, is our AI investment actually delivering value, operating safely, and can you prove that? Um, and so, this is a very deep, nuanced question, even though it's very simply stated. So, in this series of webinars, today's first one is going to be really about setting that foundation, which starts with visibility and identity. We will be getting into areas about like cost optimization, security, compliance, and governing agents in subsequent webinars, but those are all built on the foundation of being able to even see what's going on. And this, I think, is really, even in our own discussions, been top of mind for any company out there and every company out there that we've talked to who is adopting AI into the core operations of their business. Um, so if, for example, you get asked a question, if your AI bill jumped 40% last month, could you even tell your CFO why? What team, what person, what project? Most leaders can't do that. And so we see this first not as a cost problem, but really a visibility and identity problem. And that's where this discussion is really going to start. And so joining me today to have this conversation are my two co-founders at Nirmata, Jim Bugwadia, our CEO, and Ritesh Patel, our head of engineering and product. Just as a quick bit of housekeeping before we jump in. This is going to be, probably a 20-30 minute conversation. And then we're going to have an open Q&A session at the end, but feel free to drop questions into the chat at any point during the conversation, and either we'll answer it live or we may hold off until the end, depending on what the question is. But we do encourage that type of engagement and conversation because I think this is one where the industry and the category or this technological change is moving so fast that we're actually very interested to hear what you have to say about it because every company is seeing something different. And as we look to start to address, or as we look to address this problem, it's going to be a moving target. And I think that these types of conversations are going to be very relevant to being, ingrained in solving this problem. So before we get too far into the technical conversation, I actually want to start this with a really obvious question. Jim, why is Nirmata even talking about this topic?
Great question, and thank you, Brian. I'm very excited to be here. So just a bit of a background on myself and Nirmata and our team, right? So Nirmata is probably best known as being the company behind Kyverno. Kyverno is a policy engine that Nirmata created and donated to CNCF. It runs as an admission controller within Kubernetes and inspects every API call that you make in your Kubernetes clusters, in your infrastructure, and applies configurable declarative policies to it. And as like we have pioneered and kind of looked at policy as code, the thing that we've learned, and this is even going back further into our backgrounds, both Ritesh and I come from regulated industries like telecom and other, very mission critical, business critical type of software industries where we've built highly scalable, highly distributed and regulated software, which runs on global infrastructure. In those type of environments, governance becomes very critical. And you mentioned visibility. That's the starting point. If you can't see it, you can't govern it, right? So starting with visibility, but then applying the right, guardrails, applying the right policies in a fast, efficient, and frictionless way is what matters. Now, fast forwarding to AI, and as you rightly mentioned, AI is changing everything, right? As a software engineer myself, my workflow, 6 months ago is very different from what I do today. And it's fantastic in terms of how much productivity, how much things it enables. But at the same time, as I'm running multiple agents, as I'm, in some ways, there was an interesting presentation from an engineer at Anthropic, and she was talking about how every engineer can create many clones of themselves as agents, which are running 24/7. But you need governance for these. You need policies. And we believe policy as code is the only way and the best way to achieve this at scale. So that ties into the why Nirmata question. We've built policy engines for the most stringent, most regulated, most critical environments, which run 24/7 in global infrastructure. Now we're applying the same to AI.
That's great. So let's get into the meat of this conversation because I think that that's a really good lead into, what were we actually seeing? So, Ritesh, I'd love to start with you on this one. You've been having lots of conversations. Like, what are you seeing and hearing from the market around this gap in visibility and identity and attribution in AI?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think to answer that question, let's just dial back a little bit, maybe, see what's happened in the last 6 to 12 months, right? I mean, a lot of, AI has been talked about, and there's a lot of excitement, with AI for a couple of years now since the launch of ChatGPT, right? But the turning point, and when really we started seeing, the true adoption in terms of for product and engineering is really around the launch of Cloud Code, right? And that happened about 6 to 9 months ago. And when that happened, I think the excitement as well as the challenge kind of unleashed, right? Because developers could go and build out a lot of products, features, capabilities, but then at the same time, it burnt a lot of tokens, right? And there's a term for it now called token maxing. We hear about this in a lot of articles and other conversations. So as we have been talking to engineering leaders over the past 6 months or so, one theme you know we heard consistently was, look, this is great. I'm seeing a lot of use, and then my developers are adopting AI, but I just don't know what they're building, right? What outcome is being generated through this? Once in a while you'll see like a feature or product or something built out quickly, but that's you don't have that consistent visibility, and that's where the gap is today, right? I mean, you again, as Jim pointed out, you can't govern what you cannot see. So that's been one theme we've seen, and that's kind of what we've looked at addressing. It's not about token and cost, but it's also about giving that visibility and attributing that cost and investment to outcomes, whether they're projects, their features, and so on, right? But this is a consistent pattern we've seen. And if you look at solutions out there, whether they're AI gateways or prox that route traffic, or other governance solutions, they don't go deep into this problem. So that's the gap we realize and we are addressing at this point.
Yeah, one more thing to quickly add to that, right? And this is something we learned as we started adopting AI across not just engineering, but across all facets of our business. Um, AI usage, much like anything else, we all want to be, I believe, we all strive to be better and improve ourselves. But we all realize, and as leaders, we realize we are going to see engineers in many different forms, shapes, and sizes. The skill level of every engineer is not going to be the same, right? People do have to learn, everybody has to kind of, grow and adapt. So the one question that often comes up is productivity. Even if you're, using tokens, consuming a high amount of tokens, is it really productive? And are you kind of, again, using AI efficiently? So one of the things we see policy as code and guardrails and these type of, tools helping with is also guide the engineers with the best practices, with what they could do better, and give that real-time feedback. Because all of us want to improve, but we need to know what do we need to do. So even providing that visibility to engineers directly within a session to say, hey, here's how your input tokens looks to your output tokens, or this is your cache efficiency. Super important and super valuable, right? And no other tool right now does that in a nice manner.
Got it. So I think there's a question now too of the urgency around this and like what are we seeing and what's changed recently, both at the industry level and at the individual company level, that you're seeing kind of what's making this paramount and urgent for companies to address and why companies, if they're not thinking about this, need to think about this right now.
Yeah, and then that kind of dovetails into the previous, uh, question and the adoption of AI, right? And I think now that we have like maybe around 6 to 8 months of usage around under our belts, what enterprises are seeing, and this you can see, every day there's whether it's Uber or whether it's Microsoft talking about how their spend has outpaced or exceeded their budget, right? And the top line, I think the usage has accelerated because there are no guardrails or checks and balances in place, and now organizations are looking at how to curb that, right? And Uber was in April said they've maxed out their entire AI budget for the whole year, and just last week I heard they started allocating like $1,500 a month to every engineer to kind of cap their spend, right? So that's kind of something that we see as a trend. The other thing that's happening is obviously, with any technology cycle, there's initial adoption, and vendors are incentivized to, offer their technology cost efficiently, or even at really low cost, and that's what we've seen with AI. Now with Microsoft and everybody moving to this API based pricing, I think that's also going to impact the spend, right? So there are several trends, and obviously more and more usage is being driven with the and not just in engineering but in security operations, especially with talks about like how Mythos kind of can find issues and things like that. Now you have AI being used in a lot of different areas for finding issues, fixing issues, operating at scale. So the usage goes up, and now with the current pricing, I think without having those checks and balances in place, the cost is going to blow up and show up in your top line, or which is where questions are going to get asked, right? And that's what we are seeing.
Yeah, and I think that that's a really interesting point because, I think we've seen reports out there too that, the actual LLM providers may be subsidizing as much as, 10x the actual cost of the compute that you're using in this. And so the economics of using AI for feature building, for simple tasks, even writing emails, the economics may not work for much longer. I mean, at some point, they're going to have to flip that switch to make it much more, frankly, profitable for them. And this isn't an uncommon trend that we've seen in tech. Obviously, it's the economics didn't make sense when you could take an Uber across LA for $5. We all knew that that wasn't going to last forever. And so, I think it makes this idea of productivity that you were talking about really interesting because when tokens are not free, but when they're heavily subsidized, you're obviously much more, loose with them. I mean, Jim, even in our own internal company's usage or what you've seen in talking to community members, like, do you think people are ready for this? Do you still see this as a gap that they're going to have to address now or very soon in the future?
It's a rapid awakening, right? Because and both Anthropic with Cloud Code as well as GitHub with Copilot, they both announced moving away from their subsidized plans. I think Cursor also did that a while ago. So those $20 a month unlimited plans are gone, right? And everybody's going to have to deal with figuring out efficiency, token usage. And if you kind of boil it down and again think about what does that mean, it comes to how you do perform context engineering, right? So that's where those best practices, the knowledge, which, is spreading in a more or less a tribal manner. Again, we see the very clear opportunity to codify, standardize, and share those best practices. Like imagine, like, and by the way, just a one of actual example from our own real world usage, because we use our own tools and we kind of share the data with developers in terms of their productivity. We've seen some very big anomalies across users, right? And at first it seems, and we've heard about other companies like Ritesh mentioned, token maxing. We've heard about other Silicon Valley startups requiring a certain amount of AI usage, for each developer. And if they don't do that, if they don't achieve their budget, it's kind of frowned upon, which is similar to telling a developer, hey, you need to write so many lines of code per day, which is silly, right? Doesn't mean anything, because just because I use tokens, what did I use them for? And did I really produce something of value?
Hmm.
Answering that question is, it's not easy, but it's very critical. And leaders, as well as, anybody, any business stakeholder and developers themselves are going to want to know how to improve that. So that's what we're building and focused on. And we have some very intelligent algorithms to provide that type of feedback and data, which we'll see shortly as we kind of talk through the product.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think that there is something that you're starting to get into, which is you start to see anomalies in there. And practically speaking, if you're a human using AI, there's probably a limit to how much you can prompt just in a workday or in 24 hours. But that leads us into the other heavy AI user, which is agents, of course. And that creates a whole new host of challenges that I would say is, a new thing. When you talked about the number of lines of code written, you didn't worry about an agent writing lines of code. That was still in the day that a human was doing it. Now we've got this, and it brings up a big issue of identity. And so when we talked about visibility and identity, I'd love for Jim, for you to go just a little deeper into well, first, what do we mean by identity when we're talking about this? But then what are the particular challenges when governing AI, when thinking about identities, both human and non-human identities?
Yeah, let's start with the human aspect first, right? Because there are critical problems there too across the board. So every AI provider has a way of managing either API keys or sessions or some form of access control that they offer. But very often, it's done in a manner where keys can be shared, and you don't really know again who's using what at a global scale. So even if you try to allocate them for different projects and teams, it's very kludgy and doesn't fit into a typical enterprise workflow. So one of the problems we've solved right off the bat is that itself. With AI controls, what you can do is you can manage identities using single sign-on and other tools like SAML OIDC, which are very familiar. They just plug into your enterprise directory, you give access, we automatically can figure out the teams for users. So these are all standard enterprise best practices. But then you have very fine-grained control over exactly who made what call. So that's on the human identity side, and managing users as they're interacting with AI, either directly or with their personal assistants, or with agents that they're running, which assume their identity, right? Now, on the non-human side, there's a whole slew of other problems, and there's some very interesting evolution in the industry itself, which we're tracking, and kind of we also offer the state-of-the-art features on that, where of course with as the standards are evolving, like agent auth, as well as other flavors of OAuth, the fundamental need is to know if an agent calls a tool, which calls another agent or another tool, how do you chain that together? How do you kind of have the whole audit trail and be able to apply policies based on that, right? Because just because both you and I have access to Jira, we might need access to, of course, different projects. And if you're running the same agent, the agent might have the same identity, but because we're calling that agent, it needs to take on carry the identity from the user, right? So fairly complex set of problems, but these are things, some of these are evolving in the industry and new standards are being built. But at the same time, we have current ways and techniques to track this end to end and to provide that, visibility.
That's great. So, Ritesh, I'm going to ask you this question. You know, we're in such a new, like this is all greenfield. Everyone's trying to solve this at the same time. You know, how are you seeing people try to solve this today, whether on their own or through some of the other approaches that we're seeing in the industry? Like, I'm genuinely curious because it's, we all identify the problem. I don't know that we all have agreed yet on the solution yet. I say this as, let's hold off on Nirmata. Let's talk about what we're seeing out there, and then we'll get into, what is Nirmata's approach to solve this?
Yeah, and I think we're seeing some early, kind of attempts at solving this problem, right? And a lot of like large organization, like I mentioned about, Uber and a few other folks have kind of built internal, cost tracking dashboards, or they started out with leaderboards, but then those evolved into cost tracking, dashboards. We've also seen in the industry, people cobble up like 3 to 5 different solutions, whether it's like Prometheus Grafana for monitoring and other tools for observability, and data collection and so on, to kind of try and attempt to kind of get visibility into the spend and token use, right? But the challenge becomes, right, like Jim mentioned, tying everything together, right, from identity to tracking each API call and attributing costs at different levels. I think that is a challenging problem to solve, and we've not seen a solid solution yet show up, right? We've seen again attempts, some white coded and some kind of homegrown attempts to do this, but the opportunity and what we see is every organization using AI at any kind of scale needs this kind of visibility, and that's kind of what we're here to deliver.
Got it. So let's talk about what you see as like a good solution looks like, what it would look like and what's the value of like real-time visibility and attribution. And then I'd even ask that you show, give us a quick preview of
Yeah.
what that looks like.
Yeah, and I'm just instead of talking about it, I'm just gonna talk while I show it, right? So let me share my screen. We'll start looking at AI controls, which is the product that we've referred to in the conversation earlier. This is something that we've built. We've worked with a few early adopters and design partners, and are rolling it out to initial set of customers. But what you see here, I'll start with a high-level dashboard, which gives you a quick bird's eye view of where things are in terms of your team activity, the usage, insights into what's going on in your organization. What are some of the areas you need to kind of look into, and then drilling down into cost by intent, cost by projects, and so on, right? And this is just a quick high-level dashboard, but then you start getting into more details in terms of various aspect of it. Getting a good trend line in terms of where your costs are, and you can see typically costs drop over the weekend, pick up during the week. One important aspect of this is also, model adoption, right? I mean, as you all know, or as model costs vary, right? And a lot of times there's a tendency to use the best and the most expensive, most powerful model for tasks that may not require it, right? And so, having that visibility, which models are being used by whom and for what tasks becomes super important. Safety and security is also a big part of it. But then, the main thing, I think it's not just about cost, it's about what are you getting out of the spend? What's the outcome and what's the productivity, right? And we provide a quick snapshot of that, but then we have a full drill down, mapping it into projects, teams, and users, right? And just looking at projects, what are the different, who are the contributors, what's the spend at the project level, and getting a full dashboard of everything around the project, from efficiency to safety, to cost, usage, and so on, right? So that's a quick high level view of what we show. When all of this is real time, AI controls is actually sitting between your developers and your model providers, and tracks and shows this information in real time for every identity, every user, and every session that user has had, you know, um, at any given time, right?
Mhm.
So that's a quick, overview, but happy to jump into other aspects of this.
This is fantastic. I mean, so the question I'd have for you then is, I think even in our own conversations, we know companies are thinking about this problem. Most have taken at least the first step down some pathway in solving it. What do you say to a company if they've already invested some amount of effort or dollars in trying to solve this in-house, or via open source? How do you work with that scenario, and how does AI controls take what they've done a step further?
That's a great question, right? And I think like I mentioned earlier, the cost visibility is the first part of it, right? But going drilling that down into the actual where that cost is coming from, and showing really granular kind of like attribution, whether it's at the team or the engineering level, whether it's for at the project level or at the task level, and giving that type of detail. I think that's where we see a lot of solutions stop short, because at its core, this becomes a data problem, right? And
Hmm.
this is where, like, you can have like some observability tool give you like a quick view, but having to analyze and crunch that data, and show that level of granularity over over a period of time, takes a lot of effort, right? And so, the way we've engineered and built the solution is to kind of go deep into each of these areas, whether it's cost, whether it's security, whether it's drilling down into the context itself, and also efficiency in terms of token compression. Even just that feature alone, from a cost standpoint, pretty much offsets any spend on the product, right? Just 20-30% token efficiency is can save a lot from an end customer standpoint. So kind of just that's where I would draw the line. It's like visibility versus going deep. And one thing we haven't talked about, and I probably will touch a little bit later, is the control aspect of it, right? And Jim talked about it at length, the policies and how these can really help you, control and you know provide boundaries around, or guardrails around AI usage, right? Whether it's, again, security, cost, or any other aspect of it.
Yeah, totally agree. And I was actually going to say that's one of the things I think has been most illuminating in the conversations we've had is that while the visibility is certainly impressive, and we're going to get into this subsequently more deep dive in future webinars, the governance side built on that policy as code engine that you're talking about, that is something that can't be vibe coded, can't, we're building this on top of what is already the most powerful and most popular policy as code engine in the world in Caverno. And that's natively integrated into this. And what you're getting is incredible power for governance at a very low overhead stance. And obviously, we're excited to show off some of the future or in future webinars, some of those really deep dives into the security use cases, cost optimization, et cetera. So we'll get into that. But I want to draw us to close on the discussion and open it up for Q&A. And I actually see we have our first question in the chat. Um, I don't know which one you want to take this one, but does AI control have the ability to track MCP agents and tools?
Absolutely. And this is exactly, it's a great question. And that's really what we build this for, right? And we talked about developers. I mean, these identities could be, in this case, I can show over here, this is an agent, accessing your models and MCP tools, right? And we sit in between every call. So that call could be to a model, like you can see over here, or it could be an MCP call, like you see, over here. It could be whether it's a local, MCP call, invoking a local command, a directory command, or so on, or it's an MCP call going to a different MCP server, right? And we have built-in capability to provide MCP servers for your organization. So you can, not just provide access to MCP servers, but also see exactly which tools are being used by whom and so on, right? So full visibility across agents and MCP agents, developers accessing models and MCP servers.
Hmm. And to the guest who asked that question, does that answer it, or do you have any other kind of follow-up questions to that? Because I think getting back to what Ritesh was saying, even when we start approaching this, the first problem to address is identity at its core. I mean, if you don't know who's making the call, whether it's a human, an agent, are they calling a tool, an MCP, an LLM, that has to be the starting point before you can even start building any other type of attribution or governance on top of it. So, I think that's one of the things that's been most exciting to see because you can't get this through a LLM dashboard that they provide. They're giving you very limited visibility in that respect. And as you want to scale AI throughout an organization and you want to do it responsibly and make this durable for long term, you need that type of visibility. And that's just the starting point to then start to build analyses and intelligence and optimize in the future. So yeah, our next question. We're using 3 to 4 different providers right now. And the teams basically, so Anthropic, OpenAI, Bedrock, and the teams basically pick whatever they want. How does this work when a dev is bouncing between providers on the same project?
Yeah, great question on, and we are we know this from our previous kind of experience working with cloud providers and other such systems. So here we support different providers, multiple models, so you can actually configure these and have your developers use different providers from whatever tools they're using, whether it's Cloud Code or Copilot. So all of that is available, and the model ultimately we route to the model that the developer chooses, right? Assuming that model is allowed from a a policy or compliance governance standpoint, right? So
Hmm.
yes, we support multiple providers, all the big ones, and also multiple clients, whether it's Cloud Code, Codex, GitHub Copilot, and so on.
Got it.
Well,
And
thank
a
you.
parallel, I think that makes a lot of sense to draw here too, is this is almost like thinking about like how we think about cloud too, where very few companies are
Yep.
on a single cloud provider. Most have some level of multi-cloud usage. And even in, Kyverno's usage or most governance tools, they intentionally sit agnostically so that they can support. You can get a centralized view of the totality of your cloud usage, or in this case, the totality of your AI usage, regardless of which provider you're using. Is that right?
Yep.
Yes, so it's certainly provider agnostic, right? And that governance needs to be, like you mentioned, Brian. But one other thing to add with policy as code, and this is where the power of Kyverno and cell expression, cell is common expressions language, which is what Kyverno uses as its engine. You can not only block particular models, but Kyverno, as folks who are familiar with it and Kubernetes know, you can mutate things, right? So the features we're looking at, enabling are things where you can, based on various attributes of the body or based on other insights, you can even mutate which model to pick on the fly and things to that nature in a very granular and simple declarative manner, right? So extremely powerful. And again, things which you won't find in typical products.
Got it. And we had a similar question around how is this collecting all this information given we have different LLM providers and MCPs? Not sure if we answered that fully in that previous answer, but it's very closely related.
Yes, so there's a couple of different options, right? So in our AI controls acts as a proxy to your LLM providers, or it can, which is where you configure AI controls with an API key to your provider, and it can proxy through it. We also have a pass-through mode where it can actually just carry the API key from your user, where and in that case you can still apply a lot of these controls and guardrails and still get the same level of visibility in both these scenarios. But these are the options we have so that we can get visibility and provide the visibility across everything that's going on in your AI layer.
hmm And one thing I think that's worth calling out here too, that you showed very quickly in one of the previous screens, the latency from this approach is minuscule. I mean, especially when you compare it to the latency of the LLM model itself in responding. I mean, we're talking to a point that a user would never even know that this exists from a performance standpoint.
That's right. Right. Most models with reasoning and other processing, take several milliseconds to like a few seconds to respond, right? And here, what we have is like microsecond level kind of latency, applying all of the policies, doing all the checks, and a lot of the processing is happening. It's happening like asynchronously, right? Not in the full data path.
hmm Cool. All right. And then our last question. The identity gap thing is a security, it's also a security problem for us. If we can't tie AI calls back to actual users, we don't get access reviews or incident response. Does this plug into our existing stack, or is it a separate identity layer we'd have to stand up?
It's not a separate layer. It does reuse your existing stack. So whatever, again, if you're using SAML, OIDC, that's what we would integrate to and provide the identity, attribution based on that and based on how you are managing your keys or sessions within the product itself.
Got it. And we didn't talk about the actual onboarding because that's not necessarily the focus of this conversation. But this is because of the way it's architecturally set up, it is meant to very quickly stand up into your existing tech stack without any really architectural changes. Is that right?
That's
Yep.
correct.
Yeah,
Yes.
we've optimized that, within like, 30 minutes or so, you can get going with this. I mean, assuming you have access to, get the API key and configure your, SAML OIDC, but that's pretty much all you need. Once you have that, you can be off and running. And again, what we've not covered several aspects of it, but what I have been showing here is the admin view, but there's also a developer view where developers get feedback and intelligence around their use of AI, and that is also very powerful and helpful, right? So yeah, I think it's we built to integrate. I mean, we have that based on our experience, we've seen that always as a key requirement.
Very good. All right. If there's no further questions, I'd love to just say, thank you for attending. I think this is a really good conversation. And I think such a rich area, in terms of what we're doing that's changing so fast. I mean, I almost worry that by the time we have the next one in 2 weeks, the entire landscape will have changed again. But cross our fingers it doesn't so that we can, keep going on this. But yeah, we're going to be doing future webinars that deep dive into specifically how do you use a governance tool and policy as code to tackle things like AI security, to tackle things like the cost optimization, which I think for a lot of companies is very quickly becoming that top issue that they need to deal with as they need to get budgets under control. And as Jim mentioned, that cost ties directly into the productivity equation that we're talking about. Namely, are you getting a return on your AI investment? So again, thank you for joining. We will be sending a recording of this as a follow-up to everyone who attended, and then as well as information about these upcoming webinars as we deep dive into each of these topics. Thank you very much and have a good day.